Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to our listeners all over the world and the followers on Facebook. As we promised, Uganda Democratic Federation today is coming up with part 2 of Attorney Mubiru Musoke's presentation on corruption in Uganda. The first part was Museveni's corruption of Uganda, and we are going to continue with that presentation today. Mr. Mubiru Musoke, highlighted the moral decay as a result of Museveni's corruption of the country. He indicated that there is corruption in high place, which that amounts to robbery with godfathers and abuse of human rights and the power. So today, Mr. Mubiru Musoke is going to give some specific examples to highlight how corruption has affected the Ugandan society. Mr. Mubiru Musoke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. As the moderator has pointed out, today's conversation will concentrate on examples of corruption in Uganda, which some of them arise from moral decay and the regime culture of NRM regime. Moral decay affects, or in Uganda in this case, permeated into institutions. And one of these institutions is the police as an institution. The police in Uganda is so corrupted that it does not even perform its original function, which is to protect the community, but rather it is now used to promote political interests of the people in power, the NRM. Politicization of the police started by creating police units that served the political interests of NRM regime rather than protecting the Ugandan community. The NRM administration put a premium on politicization of state institutions as a means of controlling the entire country. The crime preventers group, for example, is one example illustration to show how the police was manipulated for political gain and abused the violation of human rights in Uganda. Police corruption is a violation of the rule of law. For example, on April 24th, 2017, Musisi and his wife and Chimbugwe, they were transferred from Nalufenya to Kira Road Police Station, where they were released on bond on charges of terrorism and murder. Musisi was later on produced in Nakawa Chief Magistrate's Court on May 8, 2017, and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. He was remanded until he was released on bail. The puzzle about the murder of the Assistant Inspector General of Police, Andrew Felix Kalwes, took a new turn when one of the suspects held by the police said that police interrogators offered him 1 billion shillings to implicate Security Minister Lieutenant General Henry Tumukunde in the murder of Andrew Felix Kaweesa. Godfrey Musisi Galabuzi's claim was contained in the case filed against the government in the High Court for alleged torture violation. So this is credible. This is not rumor. This is a pleading in the court, in the High Court. You can see now that the police can do anything simply to arrest people and charge them with the crimes they never committed, simply for political reasons. And so this is part of the regime culture corruption. People are arrested not because they violated the law, but because for political reasons, they want to use them as examples for punishment and torture, in fact, as a matter of fact, for crimes they never even committed. Under Kaihura, the police had no respect for the rule of law. Kaihura directed, disrespected the rule of law and the courts. This was displayed in August 2016 when the pro-Kaihura protesters turned riotous and threatened to harm anyone with the plans to prosecute and the people they had arrested. So on that day, General Kaihura and his lawyers did not show up in court in Makinde. And these goons whom they had recruited to threaten, supposedly they are working for the police, but they were not really police officers. They were private individuals who were being used as police to threaten the people. And this happened even in Besigye can tell you that they did harass him. They did all sorts of things. So you can't have rule of law when the police is abused and corrupted to do things which they were not intended to do. The first crime preventers, for example, supposedly crime preventers, actually they were the opposite of crime preventers. They were created in 1994 and they passed out the first group of crime preventers passed out at Katwe police station. The bogus idea by the police leaders was supposedly to train citizens who would sensitize the community about policing. And the program continued under Kaihura when he was appointed chief commander of the police in 2005. And as you know, you have all heard about these so-called crime preventers. They were a separate unit within the police, which they were not trained professionally. They were not they were not even wearing police uniforms. And but they were wreaking havoc on Ugandans, harassing them. Again, they looked, the government looked to militia types of people in 2014 when Penina Kobushinje, a second-year student at Makerere University, was gang raped before being killed. General Kaihura, the Inspector General Police, visited the campus, the Makerere campus, and he quickly, as a solution to the problem of insecurity, organized a 7-day training for 700 Makerere University students in self-defense skills, so-called self-defense skills. All this was camouflage. It was to hide what they were really doing. They were not really interested in the security of the people, but to do the opposite. As a matter of fact, they were called crime preventers when they were themselves criminals. For example, in November 2014, some Makerere University students were mobilized and taken to police training school in Masindi, supposedly to protect the community. But this is not how the police is supposed to function. Clearly, you can see that these were used for political reasons, not for security reasons of to protect the community. So corruption within the police unit is very rampant in Uganda. For example, Muhammad Kirumira, a Muslim police officer, was shot dead on September 8, 2018. How can a police officer be shot dead by the motorcyclists and they disappear suddenly? Nobody could find them. I understand Museveni even went to see on the scene to supposedly to look at the scene. I don't know what he was trying to do. This connects him to this crime, in my opinion, because there is no reason for a head of state I think it was 9 p.m. when they shot Kirumira, and Museveni shows up in a few minutes to see what happened. That, in my opinion, is evidence, and that implicates the government itself in the commission of these crimes. The other thing is that the police is incompetent. According to police crime report, a total of 252 and 65 cases were registered in 2018, but only 66,526 of these were fully investigated and ended up in court. That means that 185,439 cases did not go to court. And of course, of these, 66,526 cases that were taken to court, the police secured the convictions in only 1,419, with 9,613 cases dismissed for lack of evidence by the courts. So you can see that even the statistics speak very clearly that there is a problem within the police, and this is because of regime culture. I will explain what regime culture means in the case of corruption. Andrew Kawesi, the assistant inspector of police who was killed by motorcyclists of all people, said that 80% of police officers in the investigation department lacked basic knowledge on scrutinizing exhibits. Kawesi added that a majority of police officers could not analyze the various types of drugs and other crime-related exhibits which jeopardized investigations of the police. Kawese asked, how can someone who cannot vividly analyze an exhibit make a reliable police report? If you cannot describe the various narcotic drugs, then how will you combat drug-related crimes? He went on to ask. A big number of our police officers, Kawes said before he died, cannot tell how heroin or cocaine looks like. Now, this is the police. They are supposed to go out and arrest people for the possession of the drugs, and they don't know how the drugs look like. That tells you everything about the police in Uganda, that the police are there for political reasons. And not only that, because when you look at Nalufenya, I think many of you have heard about Nalufenya. Nalufenya is the official police torture center of Uganda, or was before it was closed. And the people were taken there not because they committed a crime, but because for political reasons. Even one of the MPs for Nakawa, Michael Kabazaruka, he was taken to Narufenya. Narufenya is in Jinja. Why do you take a person from Kampala to Jinja to be tortured? Not only that, but the worst case is the Kasese case. 426 miles were driven for people who were arrested in Kasese to be taken to Nalufenya in Jinja to be tortured. Does it make sense? These people think that we are imbeciles who cannot understand anything. How can you take people from Kasese to lock them up in Jinja, in Nalufenya, except when you have bad motives? And this is, that shows you that the police is not doing police work. They are doing political work. They are doing work to enhance the chances of NRM to stay in power. That's all they are doing. And that means that's why crime is high, because the police are not really dealing with the crime. They are dealing with the politics instead of protecting the community. Corruption in the civil service also is politicized. For example, when you look at one of these famous, you can call it even a notorious case, the first case is that of Uganda versus Jimmy Ramaphosa, the permanent secretary, Ministry of Public Service, and Stephen Kiwanuka Kunsa, Director of Research, and Christopher Obey, Principal Accountant in the Ministry of Public Service. These three were arrested for stealing or diverting 265 billion shillings to their own pockets. What they did was they tinkered around with the budgeting process, and they created ghost pensioners within the Ministry of Public Service, and they were not even supposed. The people who get pensions in the government service don't pay social security fund. They pay. They get a pension. Now, these 265 billion shillings, which these three guys, Ramafa, Kiwanuka Kunsa, and Christopher Bay, they stole. They were convicted, by the way, by the court for this crime, and they are still in prison for that that reason. But this, I give you this example to show how regime culture creates this type of crime, the corruption. Regime culture, I'm going to explain that very soon to show you how the Ugandan society, how we are suffering because of a rotten regime, the NRM regime. The regime culture, by regime culture, I mean the rules that govern, or the principles that govern the institution. The institution may be a church, it may be a corporation, it may even be a government. These rules, which with internal rules which tell you what to do and how to do it, are the regime culture. And the NRM was institutionalized corruption by creating a specific regime culture. What do we mean by all institutions are governed by specific principles which govern them in order to achieve their objectives. Once an institution is fully established, it inevitably evolves a regime culture within which the legitimacy of the actions of the participants are evaluated, they are measured, they are condemned, or even approved and rewarded for what they are doing. The institutional behavior we are talking about is as a constituting regime culture means that an organization creates these internal rules or norms which are used to run that organization. Now, for NRM, when I say regime culture, I mean specific principles which govern NRM. One of them is the so-called historical principle. When NRM leaders emerged from the bush in 1986, they were poor, but they were committed at that time and educated warriors who they were guided by four main principles, which later on crystallized into a regime culture of NRM, which today is the source of corruption we are trying to talk about. One of the principles related to was used to determine political legitimacy within the NRM regime itself. People who fought in the bush viewed themselves as a special breed of political agents in the history of Uganda. They viewed themselves as liberators who believed that they sacrificed everything in order to liberate Uganda from dictatorship. And they themselves became dictators, of course. This is where the contradiction arises from. they say that they sacrificed their freedom and rights to, but you know what? This historical principle is one of the foundations of the corruption in the NRM. You remember Jim Muhwez, when he appeared before the Commission of Inquiry into the management of Global Fund, which was presided over by Justice James Ogola in 2006, when he was accused, of embezzling Global Fund money. We are told that, quote, tempers flared. Muhwez reminded the judge that he fought for the prevailing peace in Uganda, unquote. Therefore, he was entitled to what he was stealing in the Ministry of Health. So this is a fundamental principle of NRM regime culture. They believed because they went to the bush, they have to be rewarded, even illegally rewarded by stealing money from the government. As we shall see later on, even people who did not fight, like Ruchikaire, who was sick in Nairobi, they sent him money to pay $25,000 because of this regime rule, this principle that if you, excuse me, you participated in the fight against Obote, therefore you were entitled to these rewards, which are illegal. The second rule is the merger. That is the cause of corruption in Uganda, is the merger of NRM with the state. There is no distinction between the state and NRM. And that leads to corruption, as we shall illustrate. NRM leadership committed another grave political sin, which encouraged the corruption. Consciously or not, NRM leaders failed to distinguish between the state of Uganda and NRM as a political organization. And this is one of the principles in which Museveni allocates to himself resources of, for example, during the campaign, he uses state resources to run his campaign because the state and NRM are one and the same thing. This started by creating the so-called resistance councils at the village level, at the Gombora level, at the district level, and those structures turned the NRM regime into the state itself. And that was a big mistake. And of course, what we are reaping today is the corruption, because there is no distinction between NRM, the state, and the state of Uganda. And they are one and the same thing. So the merger of NRM with the state had consequences on democratization itself. First, the Movement Act, enacted in 2007, declared that every citizen of Uganda was a member of the NRM. This is part of the merge of the state and the NRM. That law, of course, as far as I'm concerned, is invalid. It's null and void. You can't force people to belong to an organization, and that's what the Movement Act did in 2017. In February, to illustrate my point, on February 23rd, 2006, the Commonwealth Observer Group concluded that, quote, the environment in which the elections were held had a number of negative features, which meant that the candidates We are not competing on a level playing field because of the failure to ensure a clear distinction between the ruling party and the state, the use of public resources to provide an advantage to the ruling party, the lack of balance in the media coverage, the harassment of many opposition candidates, the creation of a climate of apprehension amongst the public and opposition supporters as a result of the use of the security forces and the alleged use of financial and material incentives, which prevented the election from being free and fair. Uh, in their report, the Commonwealth Observer Group wrote like that. They concluded this merger of the state and the NRM party leads to this, to corruption, to misuse and even during the election, uh, it creates an unleveled playing field. So the observer group, Commonwealth Observer Group, concluded our main concerns were about the overwhelming lack of level playing field, abuse of incumbency, and the commercialization of politics. As a result, the 2011 elections in Uganda did not fully meet national, regional, and international standards for democratic elections. That's a conclusion by the observer group from the Commonwealth. So what I'm telling you, there is concrete evidence to prove my case that the merger of the NRM and the state led to corrupting the system politically, that is. The third principle which created the NRM regime culture is called broad-based government principle. Everybody, these Musevens, when they came, they said, we want a broad-based government. People clapped. They didn't see the implications of what broad-based government meant. So another aspect of institutional corruption within NRM was caused by the principle which NRM regime was originally founded and organized. This innocent sounding principle was the broad-based government principle. Museveni passionately argued for the need for broad-based government after the war in 1986, instead of direct political competition based on political parties. Because according to him, to Museveni, political parties by their nature in Africa were supposedly sectarian. So you create a broad-based government in which supposedly every political party is part of the regime. But this was Museveni's cunning principles. Museveni, as I will come later on, is a thief. And like all thieves, they know how to steal and when to steal. And this broad-based government principle was created not really to create a government in which every party participates, but in which clearly the leader, that is Museveni, controls everything, manipulates everything. After all, as the first principle of merging, the merger of the state and the and the party already accomplished what he wanted. And this broad-based government made the situation even better for Museveni and for corruption. The third and fourth principle, which created NRM regime culture, from which we are now paying big dividends for corruption, is the so-called individual merit principle. They came singing individual merit. Everybody thought that, oh yeah, how can you be against individual merit? It makes sense. Uh, the situation in the case of broad-based government and NRM, unlike the other one-party regime, which explicitly banned the existence of the opposition political parties in Tanzania between 1965 and 1992, in Uganda between 1969 and 1979, and in Kenya between 1969 and 2002, when the multi-parties were reopened. The, this principle of individual merit was deception. It was never meant to democratize Uganda. It was meant to allow the NRM people to eat as as you know, that's what is the term which is used to describe corruption in Uganda, is to eat. And once you eat, you leave, you take away whatever you can. And this is what is happening even today, because of the situation we have in Uganda. Now, let us look at specific uh, scandals, the major scandals which have come up. We have the junk helicopters. You know what happened in the junk helicopters? This is when Museveni's brother, so-called Salim Saleh, uh, negotiated a deal to buy helicopters from Europe, and and he was paid $800,000. By the way, the man came and confessed to his brother, yes, they paid me. There wasn't even an attempt to say, okay, then bring that money, it belonged to the government. No, 800,000 was paid to Salim Saleh in order to sign the contract for the junk helicopters. The junk helicopters, in other words, they were junk because they never flew. All the money, the millions of dollars which were spent, and the bribe which was given to Salim Saleh went into Salim Saleh's pocket, and he confessed. It is in print. I have it in writing. And his brother forgave him for that. The other uh, corruption scandal, of course, was the privatization of the public enterprises. This included the sale of the Uganda Commercial Bank, in which my friend Sulaimani Kigundu was duped again by who else? By Salim Saleh, that they were buying, they were investing in, that, which turned out to be fraud. And of course, they ended up taking Chigundu's bank, and he died a poor man. And these are the people you can't trust, and you should never trust. They're still in power, but they think they will be in power forever.
Mr. Mubiru Musokeyo, we are losing you. I don't know what's wrong with the
Okay.
microphone.
Am I back now?
A little bit better now.
Okay. Maybe I was, facing in the wrong direction. Okay. I'm trying to explain the major corrupt scandals, junk helicopters, privatization, and the police scandal, which was investigated by Justice Sabutinde. In the police scandals, they found thousands of ghosts as employees of the police. And these were being paid every month, thousands of dollars each ghost. The money, of course, went to somebody's pocket. We don't know which commander or which officer, but we know that the fact that that was a major commander, a very big scandal. Then there is the Chogun, the Commonwealth procurement scandal, in which the former president, vice president, was in charge. And he paid a price. He was Vice President Gilbert Bukenya. He paid a price in this bill. He was arrested, taken to Rizira, and he cried. And he said, "I never knew I would reach this point in my life." But I will come at the end. I will give you the value of this scandal itself. It was a lot of money. Then the most famous one, of course, or you can call it notorious scandal, is the mismanagement of the global and the Gavi funds. In this one, the Ministry of Health illegally authorized the payment of Ruki Kaire's medical bills in Nairobi at the request. Remember, this was a specific request of the president, President Museveni. He sent a note to the minister, Jim Mwezi, the Minister of Health, to use Global Fund money to pay the medical bills, which amounted to $25,000. Now, we talked earlier on about who eats and who does what. They were using Global Fund money to pay for the bills, for Ruki Kaire's bills in Nairobi. They also, the Ministry of Health illegally spent $19,832 to send the Ministry of Health on a trip to lobby for Uganda, running for the post of Director General of WHO, World Health Organization. Both of these expenses should not have been charged on the Global Fund. The Ministry of Health was also corrupt in hiring employees and who were paid Global Fund money. Now, what is most interesting about this is the principle of separation of powers, which I mentioned earlier in one of the first conversations. The principle of separation of powers means that the parliament puts a check and a balance on the executive activities. That's how democracy functions. That's how it works. But in Uganda, of course, the president is the primary agent of everything. For example, here, in this global fund scandal. The president is sending a note to the minister to send money to Nairobi to pay Rich Kaere's. The parliament should have investigated this and exposed it, but they don't, because because of the regime culture principle. We have been stressing the regime culture principle makes NRM one entity, everything done in the interest of so-called NRM, in this case, president, uh, is legitimate. But of course, under the law and the rule of law, it's not necessarily legitimate. But that's the way it works. Uh, so you can see that we cannot really solve these problems unless we have a parliament which enforces the principle of separation of powers. In other words, when, for example, the corruption I talked about at the beginning within the police, Parliament is supposed to be the supervisor, to look into, to call the Inspector General of Police and ask questions. What is going on? Who are these so-called crime of preventers? What are they? How are they paid? Where are they trained? But this is not happening. That's why we have all this mess. The principle of separation of powers is not functioning, is not applied to deal with these situations. And as a result, everybody is paying a price. In the case of the Global Fund, guess what? They only prosecuted, instead of prosecuting actually they did prosecute Muhwez, Mukula, and Mugisha, but they were acquitted. And so they were the only people who were acquitted were the small fish. There was a case against Annalisa Mondon and Elizabeth Ngororano. These were mother and daughter. They used they got a lot of money from the Global Fund, and they applied it to their own use. Uh, uh, so was the so-called Freddie Scoop Kavuma was convicted. Uh, and then, of course, the famous one, Ted says Che was convicted, the late Che. But the ministers, they were acquitted. Okay, yeah, they were prosecuted, but they were acquitted. Under what circumstances? Well, I leave that for you to figure out, because uh, it is an opening, as they call it in Uganda, Chirimugiras. You can see it. You can see what is in the glass, because the glass is transparent. And that's what is corruption in Uganda today. Everything they are doing is corrupt, but we end up with the people, end up paying the price. And now let me give you a summary on the cost, the price paid by these kind of, some of them, of course, I can't give you all of them. Among the corrupt scandals which involved the capital flight from Uganda, the Chogamu Summit of 2007, it cost Uganda 500 billion shillings. The Global Fund, which I just referred to, cost Uganda about $37 million. Temangalo, this is where they bought land, which they sold to the Social Security Fund. uh, uh, and that one uh, was worth 11 billion shillings lost. The road scandal, the Uganda National Road Agency, that was worth Uganda 1 trillion shillings. Uh, then there was the the so-called national identity card scandal in 2010. It was worth 150 billion shillings out of taken out of the coffers of Uganda. Then there were the local government bicycles imported from India, which was worth 169 billion. Uh, then there was the pension scandal, the one I referred to, Ramafa, Chiwanuka Kunsa and Obe were convicted. That was 169 billion shillings. And then there was the office of the prime minister, in which the accountant of the office of the prime minister is in jail, but that was worth 5 billion shillings. So you can see that these scandals are very costly to the taxpayer, to the government. Now I want to make 3 points in conclusion. The first one has to do with Andrew Mwenda, the journalist. Andrew Mwenda says that corruption is good for development. He even continues to say that all the developed countries, they developed because through corruption. They went through a corrupt period. That's what created the development they have achieved. This is nonsense. For one reason, moral decay has been traced in all societies. I started this conversation with citing those who have been arrested in the US, in France, in Italy, in Japan, and other places. Because corruption, when you have a democratic government, then it is the only one that fights corruption effectively. And in our case, until we get a responsible government, we can't fight corruption. And you have people like this Andrew Mwenda, who is saying that corruption is actually good. It promotes development. Since when? Of course, it has never done so. The example he tries to say that the Western countries developed because of corruption is incorrect, because we know that the law of fraud was invented by the English in the 1600s. The law of fraud is part of the law of contract. When you when you commit fraud, that is corruption, and the contract cannot be enforced if there is corruption, if there is fraud in it. And the Andrew Mwenda is trying to tell us that when these foreign nonsense. That is stupid, because when you look at the history of the law of contract, in which prohibits fraud, which means that even in these countries like Britain, US, and they have had this law on the books for a long time, under which people were convicted for fraud and punished. And so when there's the argument is stupid, and we should not listen to, we should not listen to that kind of that, because, for example, these scandals have given you enumerated of them. How do the, for example, the Global Fund scandal, or the Social Security scandal, or the road scandal, or the privatization scandal, or the Chugumu, how do they contribute to the development of Uganda? Mwenda, I want you to answer me that question. This is a stupid argument. And in any case, Mwenda was citing Huntington. Huntington repudiated that very concept, because Huntington originally argued that it was good to bribe in order to get the contract. The reason he was saying was, if there is a British company, and a French company, and a German company, and an American company, they are all looking for, say, to build a factory in Ghana. The Huntington would say, or at least at that time say, that it was worthwhile for the American company to bribe the government of Ghana so that it can get the contract, snatch the contract away from the British, the German, and the French, and all the other competitors. In other words, they justified corruption as a form of competition, but between foreign companies. That could make sense. I could understand. An American company, if it wants to get the company from Ghana, as opposed to the British or the French or the German company, that it can do so by giving a bribe to the Minister of Finance, and then it will get the company. I can understand that. But that does not mean that it promotes development in Africa or anywhere else, for that matter, as Mwenda was trying to say. The second point in conclusion has to do with Museveni. You know, Museveni said once that he challenged everyone in Uganda. He said, who can show me that I stole anybody's land? That is Museveni. Well, you know what, Mubiru Musoke will answer you to that. I know the land you stole, and you can't deny this. Chiso's ranch was started by Musa Kiwanuka. Musa Kiwanuka started the Chiso's ranch, and he sold it to the National Enterprise Corporation of Uganda. Now we are told that the Chiso's ranch belongs to Museveni. How did he get that? We want the papers. When did he get the title to that Chiso's ranch? How did he get that title? Land I stole. You stole the Chiso's ranch. Let us give
Mr. Mbiru Musoke,
Yes.
I think you are touching your something there. That point about the ranch didn't come out nicely. I know Museveni stole it, and the people should need to hear that. That's a very important point. But we couldn't hear you.
Can I repeat it?
Yeah, but something is not right on your microphone. I don't know why it is moving now. Now we can't hear you at all. I can't hear you at all. I think we better conclude.
Even make the third point, which was that everybody pays a price when there is corruption. A lot of people don't understand. They think that, well, somebody is stealing government money or something like that. But when the examples of corruption I gave earlier on, due to moral corruption, moral decay, involved, for example, setting up buildings which collapse and kill people. Now, when corruption is involved in building illegally building or using materials which are counterfeit or not standard practice, standard material, everybody pays a price. And I want people to understand that we all suffer when corruption takes place. When a building is not built according to the normal standards, everybody who is killed in that building pays a price. The relatives pay a price, but that's not only that. The security corruption affects the welfare of the citizens of Uganda. It also affects the security. As I explained, the police behavior in Uganda, it affects the security of and it affects justice. When there is no justice, you cannot have a good, stable society. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that the microphone was not functioning properly, but hopefully in the future, we will correct that problem and hopefully we will, our presentation will be appropriate. Thank you for listening, and we will be back with another installment in this conversation, which may not be corruption, but will be definitely a very good topic for Ugandans to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mbiru Musoke. You've really highlighted the institutionalization of corruption in Uganda. Mr. Mbiru talked about the corruption in the police force and how the Assistant Inspector General of Police, Kawesi, was killed by people on a motorcycle. And of course, Museveni was the first one on the crime scene, as if he's the person who is directly in charge of solving that crime. Something that the presenter pointed out that could definitely indicated that Kaguta Museveni knew exactly what was going on. There are so many crimes that are being committed, and also there are crimes that are not committed, but they are coerced. People are asked to say that they did that because of torture. So there is a lot of corruption in the police force. He talked about the bogus crime preventers. And then he went on to point out something very interesting about the historical principle. Those peoples, the people who started in the bush, they are untouchable. They act with the impunity. Now it has permeated to their children and the relatives. and all of them are acting with the impunity, and they have that entitlement. They think they are entitled to everything. He also talked about the merger of NRM, a political organization, with the state, Uganda, which encourages corruption politically, and of course the so-called broad-based government and the abuse of incumbency, rigged elections. Then he gave us the total cost of corruption. Of course, before he talked about the total cost, he said there is the principle of separation of power. Museveni is the executive, Museveni is the parliament, Museveni is everything in Uganda. Then he gave us a total cost of corruption, and that is huge. So when you listen, you will get the numbers there. He indicated the irresponsible journalists like Mwenda, that they are doing a disservice by uttering things that can be picked up by people. Corruption definitely is not good for Uganda. Again, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Mubiru Musoke, for that very enlightening and very educative piece. It's educative because people have to know exactly what is happening in Uganda, so that when we talk about regime change, they know the reasons behind. I would like to thank our listeners and followers. Thank you very much. And as the presenter indicated, we will be back with another topic. Have a very nice day. Stay safe.